Thank you, Sanket and Natalia. Welcome to this session on breaking barriers, addressing device identification and UDI challenges. As Indira mentioned, and Natalia and Sanket also, from 2006 to the present, jurisdictions around the world created the foundation for UDI system. And this session is going to focus on those who will share their experience as early adopters. As you'll understand after hearing my introduction of the panelists, each has extensive experience in their specialty area, and we are honored that they're willing to share their stories of their UDI successes and provide insights and interact with the audience on ways to improve the system to include more adopters. Next slide. So I will start with an introduction in the order that they are on the slides. First, I am Terrie Reed. I am the Director of Partner Relationships at Symmetric Health Solutions, former UDI Associate Director of Informatics at FDA CDRH, and former Senior Advisor for UDI Adoption. On my left on the slide is Paul Copeland. He is Vice President of Epidemiology and Real-World Data Science for Medical Devices at Johnson & Johnson, leading a team of epidemiologists, data programmers, and biostatisticians. Paul's taught at the University of Pennsylvania for 21 years and has conducted studies in 15 countries, working with the FDA, EMA, and MPA, and other national regulatory authorities. He's a member of the NEST Active Surveillance Work Group and the MDIC Patient Input Steering Committee. I worked with him on several UDI adoption projects while at FDA. Dr. Jans Eldrup-Jorgensen is a vascular surgeon who has served as Chief Director of Vascular Surgery at Maine Medical Center and Medical Director of the Vascular Lab. He has served as president of the New England Society of Vascular Surgery and has written more than 100 scholarly articles published in peer review. He's founding member of the Society for Vascular Surgery Patient Safety Organization Vascular Quality Initiative. And Vascular Quality Initiative, I know that Natalia talked about the NBIR, but VQI was also one of the first registries to include UDI in their registry system. Next on my list is Scott Gasiorek. He is Supply Chain Fixed Asset Management Director at Trinity Health, a system of 89 hospitals and thousands of clinical offices across the US. He leads supply chain data content management, ERP system administration, and business intelligence initiatives there. And prior to working at Trinity Health, Scott served as a consultant for MMIS and ERP implementations. I think I have a lot of acronyms going through these introductions. Next on my list is Avinash Schonbach. He's Executive Director at the Office of Technology for the National Health System. In this role, he advises the National Coordinator and the Deputy National Coordinator on health information technology matters. He oversees coordination with federal agencies and industry stakeholders for advancing health information technology, interoperability, keyword, he will be talking about that later, for improved healthcare delivery. And he leads ONC's standards coordination activities. And I worked with Avinash when I was on detail to ONC, including that UDI part of the 2015 ONC certification requirements and meaningful use regulations. So welcome to Avinash. Katie Sommers is next. She is the Director of Research and Scientific Affairs at the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, where she has been responsible for providing management of the registries, clinical studies, research grants, data insights, and analytics for research education programs. Katie's been responsible for the implementation of 4 registries within plastic surgery, including the National Breast Implant Registry. Prior to working at ASPS, Katie worked at the Mayo Clinic, where she managed multiple registries. Last but not least, of course, is Dr. Jimmy Chang, Professor of Medicine, Assistant Dean for Academic Appointments, and Professor of Family Medicine and Community Health at Duke University School of Medicine. Dr. Chang's research is applied primarily focusing on the evaluation of technology at the clinical arena. He's participated in numerous clinical trials and have also conducted several multi-center studies. His area of expertise is the outgrowth of his clinical research and includes application of informatics and information technology to the delivery of care. I worked with Jimmy at FDA, getting the healthcare perspective on the impact of UDI. And also when I personally worked from 2014 to 2015 at the Duke Clinical Research Institute Informatics Department. So that is our very well rounded and multiple perspectives panel. So if we go to the next slide. In pre-planning discussions with the panel, we wanted to highlight some of the issues that we saw and discuss as barriers. I know that Natalia and Sanket have mentioned the results of their research, but some of these align and some of these are a little different. The first one, establishing UDI as required, sounds very familiar. This is what Natalia was talking about, is making UDI a requirement in healthcare, a clear requirement. Another barrier was supply chain issues related to implementing UDI. Also associated with that is getting that data into systems in the first place through point of care data collection. Raising clinical awareness sounds a lot like lack of education on UDI. That came up in our sessions with these experts. And then just general data challenges. And to go along with those barriers, there was success in infrastructure development, workflow adoption, clinical education, documented cost savings, and data methodologies. So we just want to start out kind of to level set and give you an overview of the areas that were sought as most important to this particular panel. Next slide. So these are going to be the topics we discuss. And I had given these to the panel members prior to this session so that they could be thinking about what they talk about. They don't have to follow this exactly, but giving a notion to why did their particular organization invest the resources, invest the time in UDI in the first place. Some of the next bullet will apply more to some of the panel than others, but we have already seen questions about the role of federal policy and regulations, and we're happy to have the representation from the Office of National Coordinator. Then alignment of the expectations your particular organization had with your actual results. I know that all of you are going to talk about that a little bit. And we're going to close out our session by talking about your recommendations for change within your organization and possibly for other organizations or policies. And we're going to, in this session, really try to engage the audience. So the panel members are going to be limited. I'm going to try my very best to limit you to about 4 minutes apiece. And with that in mind, then we'll have time for the panel to discuss afterwards, and then we'll move on. And really, we are going to open up to the audience to have this be a think tank environment. So when we do that, I'm going to say this again later, but when we go to that audience participation, please use the raise hand function, which is the bottom of your screen. But on to the next slide. Oh, I think this is, we're going to start with Avinash. So this is teed up for Avinash. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Terrie.
Sure.
For mic check, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Appreciate the invitation to join this meeting, and you know, I think it's a privilege both for ONC to talk about and come and listen to some of the challenges that industry participants are facing, and also some of the initial questions that came up from the last session were like good tee-up points. So before I get, and I'll hopefully in my 4 minutes, I'll try to address some of the questions that were asked, but happy to answer them later on. But at a high level, ONC, Office of National Coordinator for Health IT, is part of Health and Human Service. We are in the executive branch, and at a broadest level, I'll say, if you're talking of health and IT, ONC is the office that kind of coordinates across federal agencies. One of the key elements of our namesake coordination is that ONC works with different federal agencies, including FDA, to make sure that the health IT requirements, needs of these agencies are established and are realized as efficiently as we can. And there was also a question about interoperability. So just to kind of, again, emphasize, when ONC establishes our health IT strategy, our focus is squarely on interoperability, and 21st Century Cures Act is one of the key drivers that I'll talk briefly about on how ONC is leveraging and trying to improve our health IT interoperability nationwide infrastructure. I won't talk a lot about the strategic goals at a high level. What you can see is really use of health IT across the different agencies, making it realized through what we see as the key health IT platforms, which is electronic health records technology, which is the one health IT infrastructure or component that ONC regulates through our authorities. So again, background, ONC as an agency was established in 2004, codified in 2009, and really as our key regulatory authority, we establish and regulate the health IT industry and more specifically the electronic health records technology. Next slide, please. And this is where I'll start talking about where ONC's regulatory capabilities exist and how we work with different agencies. So in ONC's regulatory authority, we establish what we call as the Ehr Certification program, which is a voluntary conformance assessment program of our health IT systems, mainly for electronic health records technology. And really, they provide a set of base level of functionality, which I'll talk about, which includes actually the storing, capturing of UDI information and exchange of UDI information from provider systems in a standard way. And I'll talk a little bit about the question on FHIR a little bit more. But what you also realize is, so ONC established those capabilities working with FDA, in 2015 and earlier. So again, what you see here is some of those expectations and capabilities that are put into EHRs, which are widely adopted, as you can see here, are based on our interactions with different agencies, including FDA, that really worked with us to establish both the requirements, but also the base standards that were part of the UDI, the DI, and the product instance identifiers that were required to be stored, captured, and exchanged through certified electronic health records. But just to answer, Nancy, your question about like why there is not a substantial mandate is really because ONC provides the capabilities in technologies, and how it becomes realized are really through payment programs that you see on the right side. And payment programs are what drives behavior. So a lot of certified electronic health records technology are part of what is in CMS promoting interoperability programs. And again, some of the discussions in earlier sessions that talked about having UDIs as part of claims transaction that CMS would mandate really would be the trifecta of having now the requirements coming from FDA, capabilities in technology being available, and then there will be a payment program that enables and incentivizes industry to adopt. So really, there's a trifecta of things that need to work into place. But again, at a high level, the technology is required through both 2015 certification edition, and really it adds on and provides more technology and specific standards in the 21st century cures to ensure that EHRs are ready to store, capture, exchange UDI. Next slide, and that will be my final slide, just to kind of capture the whole, to provide more precision. What you see here is, as part of our 21st Century Cures Act regulation, we established what we call as the base minimum set of data elements that we expect all certified electronic health record technology to be able to store, capture, and exchange. We call it the US CDI, the United States Core Data for Interoperability. And what you see on the right side on one of those blue tiles is that unique device identifier for a patient's implantable device is part of that standard. And along with that element, we also have established very specific data standards. I think there was a question on the chat from the previous session about use of FHIR, the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources Standard. And yes, as part of this requirement, certified EHR technology have to exchange data in what is called the US FHIR core standard. That's part of the Health Level 7 HL7 base FHIR standard, a profile on it. So yes, those are all required as part of the technical capability that is required to be part of certified EHR technology. And so again, this is the technical capabilities that ONC regulates, manages, and ensures that those base level capabilities exist. And then what we're excited to know for is to see how it's kind of being used in industry. And then based on the feedback that we are going to hear, we obviously work with FDA and other agencies such as CMS to see what all things need to be updated to ensure that the goals of the program are realized. So that's kind of hopefully the broad perspective that I wanted to provide. And now I return it back to Terrie to go to the next panelist.
Thank you so much for speaking so quickly about such important topics so that we can move on to Scott. And Scott, you're up to talk about Trinity Health and your current UDI initiatives. So thank you.
Thanks, Terrie. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, perfect.
Great. Again, Scott Gasiorek, Informatics Director in Supply Chain at Trinity Health, primarily responsible for the care and feeding of our ERP and master data management platforms. Just wanted to do quickly a couple of the initiatives related to UDI that we have in flight. First and primarily our master data management platform. Several years ago, we invested in a platform that provides us with operational master data management capabilities. It's kind of unique, but we've essentially taken the management of our supply item file out of the traditional ERP and into our MDM platform. And we use that system as a source of truth. And we push changes from that system to relevant downstream systems that need to consume our supply item information. Our motto is, if it relates to a supply, whether it's an EMR, ERP, a distribution system, whatever it might be, we want to be the owners of that information. So we're constantly cleansing and extending that data for additional relevant attributes that we need to do business. We're also about halfway through an enterprise-wide deployment of Epic. And I can't believe we're halfway through it. It's been a monster of a project. But we're not celebrating yet, but my team's responsible for all of the master supply item information that's housed there, including, obviously UDI and other charge-related attributes that you don't typically see in supply chain, but are consumed by downstream systems. We're also piloting a solution to help us in inventory management. It's essentially centered around scanning for high-cost, high-preference supplies that we distribute through our internal self-distribution network. Based out of Fort Wayne several years ago, we built a very large, about a 500,000 square foot warehouse to start self-distributing medical supplies. And we've progressed into high cost, high preference spaces. And we've largely assumed for things like product expiry, where things used to be supply vendor or representative managed. So we're piloting a project to scan UDI for products, monitor expiration dates, and use those to essentially get products consumed and not allow them to die on the shelf. And then lastly, we launched a lean event just recently looking at process improvement opportunities in supply recall management. Obviously a big potential for impacting patient safety. We're very early on in that process, but I'm confident, although I don't have it perfectly articulated, that UDI is going to play a pretty big role in that. So great to be here with you. Looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Scott. And yeah, really appreciate it. And later we'll maybe take some time and talk about some challenges maybe you've had and where you've overcome those challenges. But we're moving on now.
We only have an hour.
I know. So I know we're staying under the 4 minutes. I'm mindful of time. We're moving on now to Dr. Jimmy Ching. So Jimmy, if you would take it away, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Terry. And it's really an honor to be here. Thank you to the NEST Coordinating Center for the invitation. I'm Jimmy Chang. I'm an interventional cardiologist at Duke and an informatician. I've had the great fortune of being an MD EpiNet investigator, a medical device epidemiology network investigator now for basically since its inception. And was also one of the investigators along with Joe Drozda in the original demonstration project of how a UDI might work within a healthcare environment. This demonstration was conducted before the final rule was released and actually think helped inform the final rule. So long history with this. And what I'd like to do over the next just couple of minutes is represent a healthcare perspective of how do you bring forward this concept of a clinically integrated supply chain. And when I say a clinically integrated supply chain, this really tries to then leverage the UDI for what it is intended, at least from a healthcare enterprise standpoint. So start with the manufacturer, move on into the supply chain side for item master, for example, item master management, the inventory management, the actually stocking, if you will, within a healthcare enterprise. Then documentation at the point of care, not just documentation of the use, but also documentation of wastage, moving that information from the point of care data capture into clinical documentation, into procedure notes, into the electronic health record, and then also envisioning how to use that data by getting that data into our enterprise data warehouse, and then also making sure that that entirety of that loop is closed with two last consumers of the data, and that is the supply replenishment component of it, as well as billing and charges. And the good news is we can do this. We've actually figured out how to accomplish this at Duke. So in kind of short order, this turned out to be a pretty complex project. We first did this in the cardiac cath lab and the electrophysiology labs at Duke. And just to give you an idea of how much time and effort this took, at the end of it, we do time tracking. At the end of it was what we would consider to be a large project. It was more than 500 person hours worth of work across all of the individuals who were involved with this. Our stages for the project are listed on here. The first one was to get everybody on board. Yes, there was an educational or knowledge deficit about what UDI could possibly accomplish. There was a champion, that happened to be me, by the way. And I literally had to go from door to door to door to say, this is what we need to do. This is why we need to do it. And a bit of a promissory note. What were we going to try to accomplish? Once we got everybody on board, the leadership in particular, we went through a planning stage. The Gantt chart is to help illustrate, it's not for you to read it, but it's to help illustrate that we needed to specify the data flows, but also the workflows. So where did the data go? Where was the work going to be changed? Who is going to be asked to do things differently? What were the costs of those things, et cetera? The technical build is where most folks focus, but actually I would argue that the technical build, once you have defined what it is that you're going to do, becomes fairly straightforward. It's work orders. It's instructions to individuals as to what they need to do. And then we went live in the cardiac cath lab and the EP lab, basically big bang. One day we were doing it the old way, which was three different paper-based processes, and we converted it all over to electronic. Next slide, please. So when I say electronic, I really do mean a truly clinically integrated supply chain concept where every individual system, every individual IT system, and every corresponding workflow that could then benefit from the electronic handling of high quality, accurate data was brought online in order to accomplish this. So in the upper right-hand corner, you see the item master representation. In the lower right-hand corner, that's the closing of that loop to accomplish the ordering of supplies as we use them. The very left-hand side of the slide represents what our cath lab staff and EP lab staff were asked to do, and that is to convert to a barcode-based approach. They had to learn which barcode, by the way, on the package's labeling to use, but that information was brought into our inventory management system, and then through the integration broker, which is the round circle, that data was distributed. Below where it says EDW, you see some of the data that typically was associated either as directly from the UDI or because we had that data already preloaded either into our item master system or our inventory management system. And then those pieces of information went to our electronic health record, went into procedure documentation automatically. So I, as a physician, didn't have to put that data in any longer, and also went into our enterprise data warehouse, anticipating the potential use of this. Last point that I'll make is that we really did think about the things that Natalia Wilson's brought forward. What was the purpose of doing this? What will we use as metrics? We did need leadership buy-in. We had to have a championship. It was based on relationships, but at the end of the day, our metrics included better clinical documentation. We have simply eliminated documentation errors. We are now doing device tracking in a much better way, including waste tracking. We're saving time. That's really one of the big buy-ins for clinicians. What is in it? What is in it for me? And the good news is, although our ROI initial calculation was that it would take us about 2.5 to 3 years, we actually recovered that in less than 3 months. So this is an easy sell once you get all the people organized around this particular approach. Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks again for the speed talking. No, that's a lot to cover in just a few minutes. So we're going to go on to Dr. Kaplan, Paul Kaplan, and he's going to talk from a manufacturer perspective. As a reminder, he's from Johnson & Johnson. So you get it from all sides. Actually, Johnson & Johnson submits data to Good ID and meets UDI requirements, but I know you're working in the healthcare space as well.
Thank you very much, Terry, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to be on this illustrious panel. My role at Johnson & Johnson is in real-world evidence. So I lead the medical device epidemiology and real-world data sciences team. And so we look at how can we use real-world evidence from various sources to understand the safety and effectiveness and quality of medical devices and surgical procedures. And from that perspective, it's incredibly important to have UDI available, primarily for patient safety. It's helpful from a supply chain perspective, as Scott mentioned, but also from a clinical management perspective, from a cost management perspective, from an inventory management and ordering perspective. And as NEST is working on rolling out an active surveillance network with the FDA, the ability to survey rapidly for safety events and pull products off the market or fix them if there is a safety problem, really would be so much facilitated by having a UDI. So what are the barriers? Well, one consideration is from a supply chain perspective. There isn't a global standard. So if you look at China versus Europe versus US versus Africa, there are several different companies with different data standards. GS1 tends to be the more globally used, but it's not used consistently. So one consideration is if you are using UDI, like a GTIN number, a global trade inventory number, which one are you using, which system are you using, and can you get alignment across different regions if you're a global supplier and manufacturer. The other consideration, I think, is that we've been involved in 2 initiatives that involved trying to improve the use of real-world evidence, and the most influential has been NEST and some precursors like BUILD that Jimmy Chang referred to and Dr. Drozda was involved in, but also MD EpiNet and other initiatives. But in the NEST test cases, we've been fortunate enough to participate in 4 NEST test cases. In those, we were able to identify UDI as much as was needed for the purposes of the study. So in the one study, we worked with Mayo Clinic, with Sanket and Yale and Mercy, and we were able to get the UDI that we needed for the study from the supply chain. And in each healthcare system, there was a different source of the supply chain which we were able to get. But we could do it, but it was labor intensive and it required someone in the healthcare system going in and being able to extract that information. If it could be more readily available, that would be much more facilitate much more rapid and less resource intensive analyses of safety and effectiveness. The other initiative that I think is worth looking at is the Scan for Safety initiative that's been happening in the UK. It was initially funded by the EU Commission before when the UK was still part of the European Union, and it was designed to incorporate scanning using RFID information into 6 National Health Service hospitals. And basically when the patient comes in, they get a bracelet and with a barcode, and every device and every drug that that patient gets is scanned in that. And when during surgery, any device that goes into the patient is scanned, and then it's tracked that it comes out, so there's no device left in the patient. It facilitates safety recalls and just-in-time ordering, and according to the hospital, it saved them a lot of money. So it's both, but in order to get that in place, it really required government funding to get this in these 6 hospitals established, and that's something I think we may consider. I think one thing that's common both with NEST and with the Scan for Safety is that there was some kind of capital infrastructure for building the system that was necessary in order to get things jump-started. And so all the work on the integrating the supply chain into the clinical management is it would be facilitated by some kind of capital infusion. The last point I just wanted to make is that since I'm in some ways the industry representative, is that AdvaMed has a policy on UDI, and it's a very interesting policy because AdvaMed is supportive of including UDI in electronic health records, but not in claims. They don't really give they don't give a reason for it, but one of the considerations is that once something's in claims, there are 5 large private insurers in the United States, and on the pharmaceutical side, there's national drug codes that NDCs that can be used to track exactly what drug is used. And so what happens is with big insurance companies is that they have a formulary committee lead who control exactly what product gets on the formulary for their 100 million people, 70 million people that they insure. Currently, the formulary committee decisions are made at the hospital system level, which consults with their surgeons around what makes sense for the patient. And so whereas if we move to a claims-based UDI, it moves the locus of control on formularies to the large insurers and their formulary committees. So I think that's one consideration that may be possibly behind the AdvaMed position.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Now we'll go on to the National Breast Implant Registry representative, Katie Sommers. Katie, please.
Terrie, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to just have an opportunity to thank Terrie and all of my co-panelists and all of the attendees. I think the key theme that will continue to keep coming out is the collaboration and the teamwork and learning from all of those around us and those who have come before and are working with us. I know there's a lot of people on the panel we've learned from, a lot of attendees we've learned and worked with, and will continue to. Our work in UDI has been focused on the National Breast Implant Registry that launched in 2018 after several years of work with FDA, which is where I got to know Terrie, as well as our breast implant manufacturers. The National Breast Implant Registry is collecting data based on the device tracking infrastructure that was already in place, and it seeks to capture safety and surveillance data by following breast implant devices over time, from implantation to explantation, as well as patient outcomes and satisfaction when they have for as long as they have the device implanted, and then in some cases after it's been removed. I know there's been a lot of both panels and some rule coming out from FDA regarding the breast implant and informed decision making and device recalls, and it's been I think that what's going on with NBIR is a really good opportunity to demonstrate the need for collecting this data and how we can do so successfully. So the NBIR gathers UDI data by scanning the device's UDI barcode or manually entering it if it's preferred by the site. And then it connects to and pulls all device information from FDA's Good ID database and puts that directly into the NBIR. The way that the device data is able to be accurate and seamlessly being pulled is critical for the continued participation in the registry, as well as accuracy and validity for our reports. I would be lying if I didn't say the technology was the easy part. And so I'll get a little bit onto some of those things for some of the roadblocks we've had along the way. Some we anticipated, some we did not. But the really good news is all of which are either addressed or in the process of being addressed, in large part due to the collaborative work we've done with both our members and our industry partners. The first challenge, and I think it was very clearly articulated by Dr. Wilson earlier, is the need for education. And so we have spent a lot of time helping our members find and identify which is the UDI barcode, putting this into their workflow. We have a predominantly solo or group private practice group who is entering data into the registry. And so they aren't even maybe having the benefit of some of the health systems in that education themselves. We have noted a learning curve in working with our member surgeons on identifying which is the UDI barcode. So much of, at least for putting breast implants in, they're used to just taking the device sticker, which has a barcode, but that's tied to serial number. And so having to identify and help them find the UDI barcode, whether it's on the box or in a different location. Working with our manufacturing partners to try to get a UDI barcode on the sticker to make that a part of the workflow that has been so common. We've also worked a lot with our industry partners on putting instructions together to help our members navigate what potential changes there are to their workflow. And then at that, the sooner we're aired, the better that is for all of us, the better that data quality will be. But I will say, with over 1,200 participants in the registry, there are over 1,200 different workflows. And so trying to identify those common themes is critical. A lot of help we've had there would be from other groups and participation with an MD EpiNet and learning from others in this space. One of the other items that was a challenge for us is we've had to work with industry on getting all of the fields populated that are meaningful for the device. And so while some of the fields in Good ID are applicable across all devices, there's some device descriptors that aren't relevant across all domains. And so we identified a need to pull information on device texture, device fill, or shape. And so we worked with FDA for guidance, as well as having manufacturers put in a certain code in the device description field so that we're able to get that data extracted from the registry rather than relying on manual entry for some of those fields, which could lead to inconsistent data. We've had a lot of successes to get to this point, so I am happy to wrap and answer any questions.
Okay, thank you so much. And Dr. Eldrup-Jorgensen from VQI, if you could give us the registry quality improvement perspective.
Thanks very much, Terry. Good afternoon, and to those of you further west, good morning. The VQI is a clinical registry that has found the Good ID to be of great value to us and especially to our patients. It is a voluntary clinical registry that collects clinical, anatomic, and procedural details on procedures, and then outcomes both at the time of the index hospitalization at 1 year. Our participants, we have over 5,000 providers, surgeons, cardiologists, radiologists, all entering data. The data has been used for quality assurance, quality improvement, outcomes analysis, and device performance. The good idea is particularly valuable for measuring safety and efficacy, post-approval studies, and has been used in regulatory decision-making. Having said that, we do have some issues with Good ID. Our workflow is based upon pulling the data from Good ID based upon the GMDN. The GMDN has issues with incompleteness, duplication, and there are new variables, revised variables, and retired variables, and there isn't really an easy way for us to keep track of that. And then with the GMDN, there are multiple codes for one device, and sometimes they're not very specific. Similarly, the Good ID will have multiple entries for the same device. And as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, the blue arrow is pointing towards the same device with multiple different listings that are sometimes just a different phrase or even just a different spacing, as you can see in those bottom two. And so the user at the point of care has put in special balloon under device type and drug-coated balloon, and then they're faced with this variety of choices, which is quite confusing. On the right-hand side, in the red highlighted area that's quite small, I apologize, the user has put in a manufacturer and a device. And on the right hand, you can see there are 6 choices that are pulled up. Some are duplicates, some vary by diameter or length. And again, with all of these multiple entries, it's very confusing for the user. And although it's valuable, it's kind of frustrating. Next slide. There we go. And so here on the table on the left-hand side, you see some of the different issues that we face: incorrect formatting, duplicate devices, incorrect product number. And so I hope that some of the other panelists can sort of address these issues. We have found that companies are variably responsive. Some are very good about correcting it, filling in the blanks. Others, they don't really respond, or they don't know who to talk to within their corporation to get this corrected. So I'll just briefly talk about solutions. One is some sort of software application or fix to the Good ID database itself. And as others have pointed out, a barcode scanner at the use of care. The barcode scanner you can get on Amazon for $32.99 and free shipping if you're a Prime member. So I will leave it at there and look forward to the further discussion.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for talking about Good ID as a wrap up. And I think we've left sufficient time for audience participation. And so I have a few questions in the queue. And what we're going to do is the Nest CC team will unmute the person after I call out their name and their question. So the first question is from Michael Simpson from FDIC ORP. And he asks about, has the amount of barcodes on an item made it difficult for users to find and use the UDI for tracking, documentation, and interoperability? So one of the panel members, maybe you could physically raise your hand since I can see you if you want to talk. Okay, Katie, I saw your hand first.
No, that's definitely something we have run into where the wrong barcode was scanned. And so we've had to sort of work with industry to sort of identify and tell people either what not to scan or, putting real instructions together that say to do this. I think as we get more towards this being sort of the standard and how things are happening, I would anticipate maybe there will be fewer barcodes or, to kind of put things in a way that is easier for use, of course.
And Michael, he was the person who raised the question. I don't know if he wants to ask anything else or clarify? That's a pretty straightforward question. Anyone else on the panel want to respond to Michael before I move on?
Yeah, Terry, this is Jimmy. I'll just say that Lena Cordell-Bancroft did post in the chat that there's an ISO standard for a symbol associated with that. I can tell you how we've handled it at Duke. We've actually programmed our inventory management system, basically at the end of the barcode, to recognize when a barcode is incorrect, that it is not, it can scan the barcode, but if it doesn't match our item master, then a little prompt comes up and it says, please rescan. It appears that you have not scanned the correct barcode. So at the point of care, there is a requirement to even there think through how can we make this the best choice architecture in terms of both capturing the information correctly and then reinforcing when the information is not being captured correctly.
Thank you, Jimmy. And thanks for pointing out, I saw Lena's comment earlier. That's a good point. The ISO standard that's been adopted to put UDI on the label of the device in a little box. So hopefully that would help distinguish it from the other barcodes. The next question is from Stanley Natchinson. And I know I also saw a comment from Stanley in response to something that Paul said. So Stanley, if we unmute you, is Stanley unmuted that he could raise his comment himself? We're trying to make this a think tank, kind of where the audience participates. So we'd like to hear from you at all possible.
Stanley is no longer on the attendee list.
Oh, well, we'll ask his question anyway. And I'll go find his comment while you're answering the question. Have any health plans asked for UDI information from hospitals? Any of you that are involved with healthcare systems, has a health plan asked you for UDI at all? That you're aware of? Scott has his hand raised. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any. And like I said, we're about halfway through our Epic deployment. We would be prepared to fulfill that request if we needed to. We actually solution for that. But I'm not aware of anywhere in the states where we've deployed where any of those payers have asked for it yet. Now, we do get from time to time audit requests on specific bills where folks will ask for that information, but it's not something that we supply in any standard fashion today.
Yeah, currently, from my understanding, the way the billing works is that it's based on DRGs. So the hospital will submit say a hip replacement cost, a hip replacement, and then the reimbursement will be standardized to that DRG, and then it's up to the hospital to manage how whatever products they use in order to meet their DRG, but give patients good outcome and surgeons what they do. So there hasn't been a large payer kind of influence currently.
And Stanley, I know Stanley Natchinson worked with us on the UDI and claims and expert former CMS person. So he said in his comment that health plans could ask for UDI to be sent to them, regardless of a requirement for it to be in the claims, as part of, adjudicating kind of the charging and things like that. So just something for the audience to know. Yeah. There's a real quick question for you, Katie, and it's the assumption that the breast implant registry is mandatory, ?
It's not currently mandatory. It is very strongly encouraged by FDA as well as the manufacturers. It is a way for our members to satisfy their device tracking requirements for breast implant devices. And so with that, we, our industry does encourage the participation. It has been something with the recent patient checklist on breast implant procedures that just came out from FDA. It does talk about the National Breast Implant Registry, and it is getting into legislation that physicians are talking on a state level with their patients about it, but it has not been officially mandatory yet, no matter how much we would really like for that to be the case.
Thank you for that. Next question is from Barry Daniels. Could we unmute Barry? Is he on the call?
Yes, good evening from England. Can you hear me? Yeah, great.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so it wasn't really a question. I was just
Comment.
responding to the comments about GMDN and the fact that there's a high degree of misassignment of the GMDN code to products, to records in the Good ID. We at GMDN are carrying out a project at the moment to look at that very thing. We're doing that with assistance from Symmetrics. And the intention is to identify the misassignments, see if there's a systematic error and therefore something we can do about it. And then the real difficult question is what to do about it then. How do we make that error apparent to the manufacturer? Do they correct it in the Good ID at source, or is it in some other source of truth, basically? The other thing about the multiple assignment of GMDN, that's a feature that was in the Good ID to support kits and procedure packs, and wasn't really intended to be a problem for things like implants. So the multiple assignment that's being spoken of is when you have a stent and an implantation device. Both terms are attached to a single product. That's a misassignment, and we can correct that because that should be just the stent, and the implantation device is just part of the same device.
And I don't know if I introduced you, Barry, but you are from the GMDN agency.
Yes, I'm from the GMDN agency. And just to say, if I have some time, the other thing we're trying to encourage is the exposure of the GMDN code, both in the Good ID, in Access Good ID, in making it available for queries, APIs, and that sort of thing. And that obviously is just going to make querying so much easier and more specific and accurate.
Well, thank you for that lead in, because I know for a fact someone, namely Terry, is going to talk about that in the session to come about GMDN codes being added to Good ID. So I'm in agreement with you there. Next question is from Joe Drozda, and he's talking, is he unmuted? He's talking about Katie's issues with the implant characteristics not being available in Good ID. Joe, do you want to talk about Audi?
Yeah, obviously, you know what I'm talking about, Terry, and so does Jimmy. This is one of the first issues we ran into when we were starting to do coronary stent work, was that there were certain key clinical characteristics of coronary stents that weren't available as discrete data within Good ID. Ultimately, some of them actually became available, but at the beginning they weren't. And so we created another reference data set that sort of paralleled Good ID, and we now call it augmented UDI data, or AUDI. And I'm trying to send a link to a document on AUDI that Jimmy and I led for ND-EpiNet that sort of gets into it in more detail. But it is one of the challenges in using Good ID. But I think it's one of Good ID is evolving over time, and the two are sort of linked. So the more data that gets into Good ID is discrete data, the less we need AUDI. But I think we have another example here of another device where AUDI data are essential to be able to do kind of robust evaluations that we like to do.
Exactly. I don't see any other questions in the queue. I'll wait a second to see if anyone in the audience wants to add another question. I do see Kerry Bacella's hand raised.
Thank you, Terry. Hi, I'm Kerry Bosella, the Senior Director of Clinical Operations at VQI. Know most of you very well, and thank you, Dr. Jorgensen, for being on this panel and representing VQI so well. We were the first registry to implement Good ID back in 2016, and as Dr. Jorgensen has pointed out, and Jimmy Chang knows as well, we've had our challenges. Whether it's a conflict of interest or not, I really feel very strongly that I'd like to give a shout out to Symmetric. We've been working with them over the last year, and we really feel like they're going to help us deal with some of our challenges with the Good ID interface. But just wanted to give that shout out because I think their product is really helpful dealing with some of the things that we brought up today and the other panelists brought up today.
Thanks, Kerry. You were not a plant in the audience.
No. I've been doing this since 2015 when it started, so I'm excited. And just simple things like, Barry Daniels and I will work together quite a bit too. So, just dealing with the issues of multiple GMDNs and broad GMDNs and, just trying to get things into their appropriate bucket. As everybody knows or may not know, paclitaxel was a very big issue for us. And we're very proud that the Good ID interface helped us address that issue in a timely fashion.
Yep. Thank you for that. Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. And again, this is not a plant in terms of being prompted to say this, but the symmetric concept really is key here for everybody to understand. And that is, at the end of the day, you want a single source of truth. So it isn't just creating this clinically integrated supply chain that I was describing, where at the point of care, the information is captured, the data is pushed from one place to the next, et cetera. But it really needs to be handled as a single source of truth. For those of you who are not aware of Symmetric, the concept behind Symmetric is that it really doesn't matter which barcode and what the package looks like. You end up with, again, that single source of truth. So I think we're all driving towards that same destination, and technologies have to be brought online in order to accomplish that. But the end goal really needs to be basically singular, and that is, how do we improve the quality of the data, make it available, make it timely, and use it across the entirety of all the processes instead of having continuous approaches with stovepiping that typically we see in healthcare today.
Right. And I will say that we really did think we were going to have a global UDI database. And with Symmetric, I do see that that's possible. that advanced technology can bring together all these siloed open data sources into a single source. But those original open sources have to be as accurate as possible for the conglomeration to work. So we still need those open public sources to be as accurate as they can be. We have 1 minute left. So is there anyone on the panel who wants to raise their hand, have something they weren't able to say during their time that they'd like to say now? Now's your
Terry,
time.
we have one more audience question if you'd like me to unmute.
Okay, sure. I didn't see it. Oh, I do see Harry Solomon. Is that who you're talking about?
Hi.
Hi.
So aside from participation through the GUDID, is there a role for closer integration between manufacturers and the clinical workflow process that Jimmy, for instance, was describing? Is there a need for real-time integration with manufacturers' data during the process of device implantation and so on, other than through the sort of static database that you get through the Good ID?
Yeah, so Harry, I'll take a crack at that. So one of the problems that we've encountered at Duke in terms of the deployment of UDI is actually in the operating room, where there are two classes of devices, or essentially two classes. One is prepackaged devices where you've got a label, but then you've got all these non-steriles that come in trays that those little screws and the plates, et cetera, they go through sterile processing, and then you have to account for them during the operation, but you can never really predict what you're going to use. Now, if you think about that, the problem is, how do you link that data with what the manufacturer understands is being supplied in ways that then allow for, again, just-in-time replenishment, et cetera. So these non-steriles in particular are a real mess in the operating room that I would say is a problem that still has not been quite resolved. There are some technology approaches that I think are very promising to account for that. And I've been working with a company. I'm going to leave them off the non-named here, just in the interest of conflict of interest. But suffice it to say, the key concept there is the closer integration of data as it happens in the operating room with the manufacturers, at least from a supply chain perspective, so you can get just-in-time replenishment, if not to then basically help the manufacturers understand performance characteristics, really close the loop in creating this, this complete concept of the total product life cycle of medical devices.
Thank you, Jimmy. And we are at 1:22. So I think we covered a lot of territory and only 2 minutes over. So thank you to all the panel. I think you can all see that this is a truly expert panel covering the wide range of healthcare systems. And hopefully they can stay on for the next steps as we discuss maybe some solutions to these challenges. Thank you so much to the panel. And I will hand